Hey guys, Happy Camper here, and today I thought we'd talk a bit about confined area landings, and in that occasion, a bit about settling with power as well. So I think we'll just get going here. We'll get the GNS 530 up on this screen over here because we'll need that in just a bit, and then we'll fly out and try and get a really good location where we can demonstrate some of the things. Now, settling with power, also referred to as vortex ring state. That needs three conditions to be true before you can get into it. And if you remove one of these following conditions, you will not get into vortex ring state or settling with power. And it's kind of three quite important things to remember, and you can really put them up like bullet points. So I'll get them out to you as soon as we've taken off here. Alright, so the first thing, first condition in settling with power is your airspeed. If you have an airspeed that's low, usually lower than 20 knots, but a good ground rule is if you're out of translational lift, then that's one of the conditions. Second condition is you have 25% or more power. So your collective, you've pulled 25% or more collective, basically. And the third thing is you have a vertical speed lower than 300 feet a minute. So you're descending at a faster rate than 300 feet a minute, if that makes sense. If all of those three things are true, then you're going to be able to get into what's called vortex ring state or settling with power. Now, when you get into settling with power, you're gonna be descending uncontrollably, and if you try to pull collective, you won't ease that descent. So you'll basically keep descending, and what happens is the rotor wash that's being washed down by your rotor blades, the air is then gonna be reused. So basically, your rotor blades are going to be trying to push air downwards that's already moving downwards. And what happens when you do that is your rotor blades won't have any new air, any fresh air to create any lift with. So if you don't create any lift, you're going to fall out of the sky, and there's not going to be much you can do about it. Now, if you get into settling with power, as soon as you recognize that you've got settling with power, you need to start moving in a direction. So you need to get some airspeed in any of the directions. So that's because that's the only thing at that point that you can manipulate with. If you pull less collective, you're still going to be descending. If you pull less than 25% power, you aren't going to solve your problem of not descending. If you try to ease your descent rate, you can't do that. So that's the first two conditions of getting into settling with power. You can't change them. They're constant. You can't change them whatsoever. So the third thing you need is you need airspeed. You need to gain airspeed. You need to get into translational lift. And that's usually just done by nosing the helicopter down, pushing the cyclic forward. And that's going to get you some airspeed that you can then start working with the other two conditions. So I think that's a pretty good spot over here, where we'll try to get into some confined area landings. I think we'll do one down here by one of those houses. We've got some poles, we've got some houses, we've got some trees. So that's kind of that's three things that are quite common in these confined area landings. So when you find your point where you want to land, you want to do a bit of recon on it. So usually just do a couple of orbits flying around it and try to see what's there. And I can see there's a power line going along the road. So if we come in from that direction, we're gonna have to watch out for that. We do have some poles that we can use as reference. We've got trees on either side, so if we come in from the other direction, we'll have to clear the tops of those trees before we can get into the spot. And we also have some houses down there that we need to watch out for. So when you've then got your location that you want to land, you want to see where the winds are coming from, because that's going to help you decide where you want to come in from. Now, a way to do this, right here, we're next to the airport, so we can just look at the wind suck, and we see the wind is coming out of the northwest here. And the winds, see the wind suck, about 10 knots, might be gusting though. So I'd say, yeah, probably about 10 knots of wind coming out of the northwest. That's going to be a part of where we want to come in from, because that's fairly significant. That can make a difference on the approach. Because an extra 10 knots, that just means we need 10 knots of ground speed to reach the kind of magical 20 knots where you can descend at a faster rate than 300 feet a minute. So we'll come down to that spot, and then we'll double check with the winds. Now, if you weren't close to an airport and you still wanted to do this and you wanted to find out where the winds were from, you can look at smoke coming out of different chimneys or something like that, but that's not always possible, and there's not always any flags, and they're not that common in X-Plane. So a way you can do it is, I'll switch over to the co-pilot seat here. We can compare our airspeed with our ground speed. So if we just do a practice approach here, let's say we were to come in from this direction, we'll keep some height so we don't get too close to those power lines, but we'll compare our airspeed. So we're going exactly 60 knots here, and our ground speed is about 55. So we can see airspeed just went up to 65, so we can see that the 10 knots are coming out of the northwest. We can see that here. So if we were to come in and try to do the approach from the other direction, what we're going to see is our ground speed is going to be higher than our airspeed. So we'll quickly try that. So comparing your ground speed on your GPS to your airspeed is usually quite a good way of seeing how the winds are acting in a specific area. It's also really accurate, since the GPSs are very good quality in aviation, so you can really use them to your advantage. So we're doing 30 knots here, and our ground speed is 40. Doing 40 knots now, and you can see we're getting up, but you can really compare. So we'll try and steady here. It's about 50 knots. We do 60 knots ground speed. It's a bit gusty, but generally speaking, it's about 10 knots out of the northwest. So we'll keep that in mind. So now we have all of the kind of dangers that can be in the area. So the power lines and the trees and the buildings, we have them under control. We know where they are and we know what to watch out for. And we've also got the wind direction, and I think coming in over those power lines is going to be safe enough. Now, one important thing when coming over power lines is you want to go over the poles and not over the wires themselves, because wires can be really difficult to see, and it can be really difficult judging the height of wires. So if you want to come in over the power lines, you need to come in over the poles, because the poles are, solid, fairly big objects that you can judge your height according to or compared to. So we'll go around in a right-hand turn here, and we'll find that confined area again, and then we'll come in over the poles and get the helicopter down. When we get below the translational lift, so we're out of translational lift, we'll have to make sure that we're not descending any faster than 30 or 300 feet per minute. Alright. So our spot's just down here on our right, along the road just where that T intersection is. And we'll come in from the northwest, which is going to be the right-hand turn here. And we'll come in slowly. And then we'll clear the wires, making sure we don't hit our tail on them. And when we're sure we are clear of the wires, we can start our descent down below the height of the wires. So we've got the pole here. Now I'm going to do an approach a bit out of trim here. That means we're actually yawed to the left compared to our flight angle. That's just going to give me a better view of the landing spot. So we're coming in, we clear the pole, or we're higher than the poles. And you can see we're just about to clear the poles. Clear the poles definitely. Slow it down. And start a descend. You want to watch that descend rate. So really make sure it doesn't get above 300 feet a minute. In reality, you just want to shoot for 300 feet a minute. It's probably going to be about 500 feet a minute when you actually can see an issue where you might get into settling with power. But you shoot for 300 feet a minute to make sure that you aren't descending too fast. So it gives you a bit of an error margin in case you overshoot a bit. I'm coming down here. So another thing is if you have quite a bit of wind, you might be moving in and out of translational lift due to the airspeed of gusts. You might have wind gusts, and that's going to give you more or less lift, and you might have that during your descent down into the location. So if you have that, you really need to be watching your descent rate, because that can easily get out of control if you have translational lift and you then due to a wind gust kind of not being there anymore, you might lose that translational lift, which is going to make you plummet or descend faster, basically. Alright, so that was fairly good. Now we're in a big helicopter, so these confined areas are quite big. But I think we'll try and find a really small confined area that we'll try to do a fun approach into. Alright guys, so I think we found a pretty good confined area place to land just over here. It's it looks really small from above. It'll be bigger when we get down into it, but it's definitely going to be a bit tricky to get into. Now it's just down here in this clearing. You see there's a clearing that's heading into those people's garden. That's not where we're going to land. There's going to be a house there. We want to land to the right of the garden. That's also going to make us go into the wind, which is going to place us to the northwest. So we'll come around to the right here, and it can be a bit difficult to explain, so I'll show you guys how to do this approach. Now if the winds were stronger, I would probably want to come in directly into the wind, but because the winds are only about 10 knots, we'll come in kind of with the wind off of our right, 90 degrees to the right, and then when we get closer, get slow, and when we can, we'll do that turn to the 90, or do that turn 90 degrees to the right, placing our nose directly into the wind. So hopefully that'll go well. It looks really small from above, but when we get down into it, it's going to be I'm pretty sure there's going to be space for about 2 or 3 helicopters to actually land there. So I'm not too worried about it. Now the trees are the only real worry here. There's also a fence that we want to make sure that we're clear of. But we're going to be well clear of that. It's quite far behind. So as long as we push the helicopter far forward, we'll be clear of that fence for sure. So we don't want to be rushing this, so I'm going to slow the helicopter down, and then we'll come in slow and steady, and we'll keep the selling with power 3 conditions in mind. So just leaning forward, making sure that we're coming in straight on the clearing here, coming down to 14 knots now. It's pretty good speed. Want to make sure we don't go into the clearing yet. Want to stay above those treetops to make sure our tail, our main rotor, is clear the trees. So that tree just to our right is kind of the final tree to worry about. So we can start descent down here, but I think we'll just bring it around 90 degrees to the right before we start our descent. Alright. Facing northwest now. And we'll start our descent down. Bit fast on the descent rate for a second then. Just making sure those wind gusts, they don't play too much of a role. Now also you want to make sure we're clear behind that fence. We definitely are. We saw that fence out of the side window, and we are well clear of it, so we'll bring the helicopter down here. Sweet. Alright, so you can see now that we're down into it. We'll go into external view and you can see we're a lot smaller than the clearing. You know, if we look behind us, there's loads of space to that fence, and if we look in front of us, there's also quite a lot of space before we hit those trees. Alright, so I think we'll talk a bit about a climb out of here, a takeoff. And the clearance between these two trees here, it's quite big, so we can definitely fit a helicopter through there. So I think what we'll do is we'll take off, and we'll kind of hover taxi, backtrack the clearing, and then we'll take off into the wind, which is going to be into the northwest. That's going to give us translational lift fairly soon, and allowing us to get above those trees safely. Now, we could power out of here, but you might be in a situation where you don't have so much power. You might be operating in some mountainous terrain. You might be operating in high density altitude, and in that case, you might not have so much power to your available. So you might want to really get going and get some speed before you try to climb out. I'm going to back taxi here. I'm going to do a rudder turn to the right, because we're sure our tail is clear to the left behind us. Just making sure we don't hit anything here, and then we can get going out of here. So we'll get some forward airspeed, and we'll pull all the collector if we can. Pitch back, make sure we clear those trees. And then when we clear the trees, we can nose the helicopter down again to get some more airspeed. Alright, so I'd say that was a pretty successful confined area landing. I hope you guys have enjoyed, and I hope it helped you guys out. This is really some of the fun things that you can do in a helicopter, and why I really love helicopters compared to airplanes. There aren't that many airplanes that can land in these small, really cool areas. So that's definitely one of the big reasons I love helicopters. Alright, so we'll just bring it back down here, and it's really important to remember those settling with powers, because if you just come down here slowly and follow the HV diagram into a normal approach, you won't have any issues. You won't have any chance of getting into settling with power, so you don't have to think about it too much. But when you do those confined area landings, you can really get into settling with power quite quickly before you know it. Take taxiway Bravo down here. I'll park the helicopter up by these cones here. Alright, so as I said, hopefully you guys enjoyed that. Hopefully it helps you guys out. If it did, let me know. And until the next video, guys, take care.